Imagine the end of the world, where gods fall, monsters rise, and the very earth shakes beneath the clash of destiny. This is Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, a battle of fire, frost, and fury from which a new world will rise from the ashes. In the frozen heart of the north, where the midnight sun no longer rose and the air itself seemed heavy with silence, the first whispers of doom began to stir. The seers had spoken of it in trembling voices. The skalds had sung of it in riddles. Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, the end of all things. But endings do not come with the swiftness of a falling axe. They creep like shadows, gathering strength, until the world itself quakes beneath their weight. The first omen was the Fimbulwinter, the great winter. Not a season, but 3 endless winters chained together, each harsher than the last. No summer came to break their reign. Snow fell ceaselessly from the heavens, burying the forests, the fjords, the very homes of men. Rivers froze to silence, and the seas turned into fields of jagged ice. The winds howled with such ferocity that even the sturdiest oaks cracked and splintered, falling like the bones of giants. And men turned upon each other. Fathers abandoned sons, brothers slew brothers, and the hearth fires of kinship grew cold. Where once there was feasting and song, there was now only hunger and the echo of screams carried on the storm. The bonds of oaths, the sacred ties of blood and honor, unraveled. The world was devouring itself, one desperate act at a time. Even in Asgard, the shining realm of the gods, a knees spread like frost across a window pane. Odin all farther, perched upon his throne of Hlidskjalf, gazed into the 9 realms with one solitary eye, and his ravens, Hugin and Munin, whispered tidings of dread. For Ragnarök was not merely the death of men, it was the unmaking of the cosmos, the sundering of order itself. As the great winter gnawed at the bones of Midgard, deeper omens awoke in the hidden places of the 9 realms. Far from the eyes of men, in the shadowed caverns where gods had once dared to bind the beast, Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, child of Loki, began to strain against his fetters. Gleipnir, the silken chain forged from impossible things, the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, had held him fast for ages. Yet with every passing storm, with every crack of thunder that split the skies, the wolf's muscles swelled, his fury boiled, and his roars shook the iron roots of Yggdrasil itself. His eyes, blazing like molten coals, pierced the darkness, and each breath from his jaws was a furnace that scorched the frozen ground. The gods had bound him long ago in fear of what he would become, but now destiny, woven by the Norns, could not be undone. The cords trembled, frayed, and at last, with a sound like the rending of the world, they snapped. Fenrir was free. His howl tore across the 9 realms, a sound so vast and terrible that even the bravest warriors dropped their weapons and fell to their knees. And yet, the wolf was not the only terror awakened. Beneath the endless seas, in the black chasm where no sun nor moon could reach, the Midgard serpent, Jörmungandr, stirred. For centuries, the colossal serpent had coiled itself around the world, biting its own tail, an eternal circle encasing Midgard. But now it writhed, thrashing its massive body, sending mountains tumbling into the sea and raising waves that devoured coastlines. The waters frothed with venom as the serpent rose, its scales glistening like iron in the half-light, its eyes gleaming with ancient hatred. Together, wolf and serpent proclaimed the end. One would devour the sun, the other would poison the skies. There farther, the trickster Loki, still bound in his cavern of torment, could hear their cries. and though venom dripped upon his face and chains bit into his flesh, he smiled, for his children were moving, and the doom of gods was near. When the chains of Fenrir shattered and the Midgard serpent thrashed upon the seas, the whole of creation trembled. But there were yet darker heralds to come, 3 roosters whose cries would pierce every realm, waking both gods and monsters to their final fates. In Asgard, Guling Kembi, the golden-combed rooster, ascended the peak of Valhalla. With wings shimmering like fire at dawn, it beat the air and let out a cry so sharp and fierce that the walls of Odin's great hall shook. Every fallen warrior, the Einherjar who had feasted in endless glory, froze at the sound. For ages they had trained with spear and shield, laughing over mead, awaiting the day when they would be summoned. Now they knew the call had come. They would march to war beside the gods. Far below, in the realm of hell, a second rooster lifted its head. This bird was black as soot, feathers dripping as if soaked in midnight itself. Its voice was hollow, the sound of graves opening. At its call, the dead stirred. Warriors who had not found their way to Valhalla, souls broken or forgotten, began to move. Shadows rose from the dust of hell's silent plain, and in their empty eyes glimmered the promise of vengeance. And in Jotunheim, among the mountains of the frost giants, the third rooster crowed. Its feathers were red as blood, and its cry split the icy peaks. The Jotnar lifted their colossal weapons, their hate for Asgard burning brighter than ever. This was the moment they had long awaited, the march of giants upon the realm of gods. The world convulsed. Across the 9 realms, armies stirred. The dead prepared to work. The giants gathered. The warriors of Valhalla armed themselves for the last dawn. Odin, upon Hlidskjalf, heard each cry echo through the fabric of Yggdrasil, and even his mighty heart grew heavy. The storm of Ragnarök had broken, and nothing, no spell, no wisdom, no plea, could turn it back. From the cold and silent realm of hell, where mist hangs like shrouds and the rivers are black with sorrow, something vast and terrible began to move. Upon the dark waters, a shape emerged, first a whisper, then a shadow, then a monstrosity so great it blotted out the horizon. This was Naglfar, the ship of the dead, and its hull was not made of wood, nor of iron, but of something far more dreadful, the untrimmed fingernails and toenails of the countless dead. For ages, as mortals were buried, their neglected remains fed the building of this vessel. And now, complete, it groaned upon the waves, a nightmare forged of mortality itself. The dead gathered upon its deck in silence, row after row of pale, hollow-eyed figures, summoned by the crow of hell's black rooster. Their whispers were like rustling bones, and when they raised their hands to the sky, frost spread across the waters. The ship creaked forward, pushed by storms so fierce that even the bravest seafarers would have prayed for death rather than endure them. And at its helm stood none other than Loki, the trickster, the oath-breaker, the father of monsters. He had slipped his bonds at last, freed by the quaking of the earth and the breaking of destiny's threads. His eyes burned with a madness born of betrayal and vengeance. Once, he had walked among the gods of Asgard as a brother, feasting in their halls, laughing in their company. But now he returned as their doom. With chains still clinging to his limbs and venom burns upon his flesh, he grasped the rudder of Naglfar, steering it toward the lands of men. The sea rose in rebellion, waves as high as mountains crashing upon the world's shores. Lightning split the heavens, and from Midgard's coasts, mortals stared in horror at the monstrous silhouette sailing ever closer. Naglfar carried not just the dead, but despair itself, and wherever its shadow fell, the living trembled. For this was the army of hell, the host of the forgotten, and behind their leaders Sligrin lay only ruin. The gods, the giants, the dead, and the beasts, all were moving. The world was gathering its forces, drawn to a battlefield woven by fate before the first tree had sprouted, before the first star had burned. Yggdrasil itself groaned, its roots bleeding, as Naglfar cut through the waves. The twilight of gods was no longer prophecy, it was here. From the depths of Muspelheim, the realm of flame where shadows burn and the very air is alive with fire, the final host awoke. The sky split with crimson cracks as the land itself shuddered, and from the rift poured forth the fire giants, ancient beings older than memory, clad in armor of molten rock, their eyes blazing like furnaces. Their every step turned stone to ash, and the ground behind them was left smoking and blackened. At their head strode Surtr, the swallower of worlds, his colossal frame towering over his kin. In his hand he bore the sword of doom, a blade so vast and so incandescent that its light rivaled the sun. Forged in the primal fires before time itself, this weapon was destined for a single purpose: to end the 9 realms in a storm of fire. When Surtr raised it high, the sky itself ignited, and the horizon burned red as though dawn had come, but it was not dawn. It was the herald of the end. The armies of Muspelheim surged forward, their roars louder than thunder, their heat so fierce that seas boiled and mountains bled rivers of molten stone. Trees burst into flame where their shadows fell, and the frost of the great winter hissed and melted at their approach. What the Fimbulwinter had frozen, Surtr would incinerate. Across the cosmos, all could see it, the blaze of Muspelheim spilling into the realms. Mortals shielded their eyes as the heavens glowed like a forge. The giants of Jotunheim felt the heat upon their icy cliffs and answered with howls of defiance. In Asgard, Heimdall upon Bifrost tightened his grip upon the Gelahar horn, for he knew soon he must blow it with all his strength. And so, the 2 great forces of chaos, the ship of the dead upon the seas and the legions of fire upon the land, advanced inexorably toward one place. All paths, all prophecies, all blood oaths converged upon the plain of Vigrid, a battlefield vast beyond imagination, where the gods would make their final stand. The end was not coming. High upon the shimmering bridge of Bifrost, where the rainbow arc binds Asgard to the other realms, stood Heimdall the Watcher. His golden teeth gleamed in the firelight of Muspelheim, and his eyes, sharper than any falcon's, had seen every omen unfold. He had stood vigilant since the dawn of ages, for this was his destiny, to guard the realms until the day the end arrived. And now, as fire giants marched and the sea boiled with the serpent's wrath, Heimdall knew that moment had come. In his hands he held the Gelahar horn, the resounding horn that could be heard across all worlds. Its surface glowed with runes, carved by Odin himself, runes that promised its sound would reach the roots and the crown of Yggdrasil alike. Heimdall lifted it slowly to his lips, every motion echoing with the weight of eternity. When he blew, the sound was no mere note, it was a storm-given voice. The blast shook mountains, shattered icebergs, and silenced oceans. It rolled through Midgard like thunder, tore through Jotunheim like an avalanche, and streaked across Muspelheim like a gale of fire. It reached hell's depths, stirring the legions of the dead to march faster, and it climbed the branches of Yggdrasil until even the Norns themselves paused their weaving. But in Asgard, the cry of the Gelahar horn was both a summons and a warning. Odin rose from his throne, grim-kneed the All-Father, his single eye burning with grim knowledge. He called the gods to arms, Thor with Mjolnir in hand, Tyr with his unyielding courage, Freyr shining like the harvest sun, Freyr with her falcon cloak, and countless others, each preparing for their final trial. The Valkyries soared above, their wings slicing the storm, ready to guide the fallen to their fate. The Einherjar, the chosen dead of Valhalla, gripped their shields and spears, their songs replaced by silence. This was no training, no feast after battle. This was the day for which they had lived, died, and waited. At Odin's call, they formed into ranks, gleaming like a river of steel beneath the ever-darkening sky. And across the 9 realms, even their enemies heard the horns blast. The giants tightened their grips upon stone clubs and ice spears. The wolf licked its fangs, tasting the blood of a future yet to spill. The serpent churned the oceans higher, while Surtr raised his burning sword to answer the call. The horn had sounded. The gods were gathered. Ragnarök had begun in full. Even as the horn of Heimdall echoed through the 9 realms, Odin, the All-Father, felt the weight of inevitability press upon his shoulders. He, who had sacrificed an eye for knowledge, who had hung 9 nights upon Yggdrasil to drink from the Well of Runes, knew well what was to come. Yet still, in this twilight hour, he sought counsel once more, for the fate of gods and men rested upon the choices of this final day. Guided by his ravens Hugin and Munin, Odin descended through the roots of Yggdrasil to the Well of Mimi, that hidden spring of wisdom guarded by the ancient being who dwelled there. The air grew still, heavy with the scent of earth and the deep hum of the tree that binds the worlds. The waters shimmered with strange light, as though reflecting not the present sky, but all skies that had ever been, and those yet to come. From the shadows emerged Mimi, the keeper of secrets. Once a god, now a severed head preserved in magic, he was more alive than the living. His eyes burned with ageless fire, and his voice rolled like distant thunder. "You come again, All-Father," a Mimi said, his tone heavy with the gravity of countless ages. "But you know the threads already. Ragnarök cannot be turned aside." Odin bowed his head, gripping the shaft of Gungnir, his eternal spear. "Still, speak to me. Tell me not of victory, but of how we must stand. Tell me of the shape of the last battle, that I may face it with clear sight." The waters of the well stirred, and images shimmered within their depths. Mimi spoke of fire and ice colliding, of the wolf who would swallow the sun, of Thor locked in mortal combat with the serpent, and of Odin himself facing Fenrir with all the valor of the ages. His words painted doom in strokes as vast as the cosmos. Yet within the tide of despair, there was a glimmer, not of hope for the gods, but of renewal beyond their fall. "Know this, Odin," a Mimi intoned, his voice resonant with finality. "The end is written, but from the ashes, a new dawn will rise. You will fall, All-Father, as all must fall. But your sacrifice, your defiance in the face of the inevitable, will be the seed from which the next world grows." Odin closed his eye, the weight of truth pressing upon him. He did not flinch. He did not turn back. For he was the All-Father, and even if death awaited, he would meet it with dignity, with fury, and with purpose. The skies over Asgard darkened, a swirling tempest of violet and crimson that mirrored the turmoil of the realms below. The air vibrated with anticipation, and the ground itself seemed to pulse in rhythm with the hearts of the gods. From the golden halls of Valhalla, the Einherjar, warriors chosen from countless mortal lives, clanged their spears and shields in solemn rhythm. Their armor gleamed, polished by centuries of training, reflecting the storm above in shards of light. Odin, mounted upon Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed that could gallop through air and sea alike, surveyed the ranks. Thor hefted Mjolnir, lightning crackling along its head, each spark a promise of destruction. Freyr adjusted her falcon cloak, its feathers glinting like molten gold, eyes alight with determination and sorrow alike. Tyr sharpened his blade with steady, deliberate strikes, knowing the price of courage would soon be demanded. The Valkyries soared above, wings slicing through the storm-laden clouds. Their cries, both haunting and thrilling, rallied the Einherjar, guiding them with the certainty that fate had woven for this day. Spears were raised, shields locked, and a silence fell, the quiet before a storm the likes of which the 9 realms had never known. Below the bridge of Bifrost, the legions began to march. Each footfall of gods and warriors alike reverberated across mountains and plains, a drumbeat of inevitability. From distant Midgard, the cries of terrified mortals echoed upward, swallowed by the roar of battle drums in Asgard. The horizon burned with fires not of their making, Muspelheim's inferno spilling into Jotunheim, the seas churning under the Midgard serpent's thrashings, the wolf Fenrir prowling closer to freedom. Every god, every chosen warrior, felt the weight of destiny pressing upon them. Yet none faltered. For this was their final march, toward the plain of Vigrid, where fire and frost, life and death, order and chaos would collide. And as they advanced, Odin's single eye scanned the horizon, knowing that every step forward brought them closer not just to battle, but to the culmination of everything the cosmos had ever been. The storm overhead howled in anticipation. The battlefield awaited. Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, was now fully upon them. A thunderous crack split the skies as Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, broke free from his bindings at last. The chains of Gleipnir, frayed by centuries of destiny, fell like splintered steel to the frozen ground, and the beast rose, towering over mountains, its eyes molten with fury. Each breath it exhaled scorched the frost of Fimbulwinter, turning snow to steam and ice to jagged shards. The ground trembled beneath its pores, and rivers of fear rippled across the 9 realms. Odin, mounted on Sleipnir, raised his spear high, his one eye blazing with unyielding resolve. Around him, the gods readied themselves. Thor's grip on Mjolnir tightened, lightning dancing across its hammerhead in eager anticipation. Tyr, resolute as ever, raised his sword with a steady hand, his courage unshaken by the shadow of doom that fell from the wolf. Fenrir lunged, and the battle erupted. The wolf's jaws, wide enough to swallow the sun, snapped with terrifying speed. Sparks flew as Gungnir clashed against its fangs. The earth quaked under every strike, mountains shivered, and even the roots of Yggdrasil groaned with the shockwaves of each collision. Odin countered, weaving ancient runes into strikes of unparalleled power, seeking the one weak point in destiny itself. The Einherjar fought valiantly, arrows and spears flying with precision. Yet Fenrir's fury was relentless. The wolf tore through warriors as if they were mere leaves in the wind, each step leaving craters scorched and splintered. Still, the gods did not waver, for they knew that to hesitate was to surrender not only their lives, but the fate of all realms. Above, the Valkyries circled, their cries sharp as blades, guiding the fallen into Valhalla even as the living faced annihilation. The storm of Ragnarök raged in full force, lightning clashing with ice, fire meeting frost, the heavens trembling as the first true battle of the end of the world began. Fenrir was unleashed, and with him, the twilight of gods had truly arrived. The seas churned like molten metal as the colossal Midgard serpent, Jörmungandr, rose from the abyss. Its scales glimmered with a green-black sheen, each segment wider than the holes of a Asgard, eyes blazing with ancient hatred. Waves towered like mountains, swallowing islands and smashing forests into splinters of wooden mist. Its tongue lashed the air, dripping venom that sizzled upon contact with the snow and ice of Fimbulwinter. From the battlefield, Thor advanced, Mjolnir crackling with pure lightning. His red cape whipped in the storm as his muscles tensed, every step resonating with the weight of a god's fury. He had known this day was coming, had trained through ages for the moment when the serpent would rise. Now, face to face with his eternal nemesis, the god of thunder roared, summoning the storm itself to join his strike. The first clash was cataclysmic. Jörmungandr struck with its massive coils, smashing through mountains and tossing entire forests into the sea. Thor leapt, swinging Mjolnir, and lightning arced across the serpent's armored scales, each strike echoing like the roar of a dying star. Steam hissed where fire met venom, and the ocean boiled under their power. Every blow shook Midgard, sending tremors through mountains and chasms, as though the very bones of the earth protested their battle. Around them, the world seemed to hold its breath. Mortals on distant shores could feel the waves of power rolling toward them, seeing flashes of lightning that illuminated the horizon like the fires of creation itself. The Valkyries watched from above, their wings slicing the storm clouds, as the fate of men and gods alike hung upon the outcome of this titanic duel. Thor gritted his teeth, Mjolnir raised for a final, devastating strike. Jörmungandr hissed, coiling tighter, venom dripping like acid, eyes locked with Thor's unwavering gaze. Each understood that this was no ordinary battle. This was the end of everything they had known. The clash that would shake the 9 realms to their very core. Lightning and venom collided. The heavens screamed. The earth trembled. And the duel of thunder versus serpent had begun in full. From the shadowed waters where Naglfar had sailed, Loki emerged at last. Chains still clung to his limbs, venom burned across his flesh, but his eyes gleamed with cunning that had survived eons. He had awaited this moment, the twilight of the gods, where chaos would reign supreme and his revenge would take form. With a sly grin, he stepped onto the scorched battlefield of Vigrid, each footfall sending tremors through ash and ice alike. Opposite him, Heimdall, the vigilant watcher, stood firm upon the windswept plain. His horn, Gjallarhorn, hung ready at his side, but now he would not summon, he would act. Golden armor gleamed beneath the storm-laden sky, and his eyes burned with the clarity of foresight. Every movement of Loki, every twist of his shape-shifting form, was anticipated. Heimdall had watched the trickster for centuries, knowing the day would come when it alone would decide the fate of the realms. With a sudden burst, Loki lunged. His form shifted fluidly, serpent, shadow, flame, each strike impossible to predict. Heimdall met him with unwavering resolve, parrying, striking, countering with the precision of one who had glimpsed countless possible futures. Sparks flew where divine strength met trickery, and the air crackled with energy that bent light itself. The battlefield seemed to narrow around them, the other gods and monsters momentarily frozen, mesmerized by the dance of cunning and vigilance. The clash escalated, Loki's laughter slicing through the roar of Fenrir, the thunder of Thor, and the hiss of Jörmungandr. "You cannot stop what is destined, Watcher," he spat, shifting into a shadow that vanished and reappeared behind Heimdall. But the Watcher's gaze did not waver. In one fluid motion, He met the trickster's assault with a strike that forced Loki back, sending him skidding across the charred earth of Vigrid. This battle, smaller in scale than those of gods and monsters, was no less critical. For Loki and Heimdall embodied the struggle of fate and free will, of chaos against order. Their confrontation would decide who moved first in the endgame, who would survive long enough to witness the fall of gods, and who might tip the scales of Ragnarök, if such a thing were even possible. The storm howled louder, lightning danced across the horizon, and the two eternal beings clashed again, each strike echoing across all 9 realms. Odin, All-Father of Asgard, rode forward on Sleipnir, 8-legged steed pounding against the trembling earth, eyes burning with the wisdom of ages. Before him loomed Fenrir, monstrous wolf of prophecy, jaws wide enough to swallow the sun, fangs dripping with malice and fire. The wolf's roar shattered the air, rattling mountains and sending tremors across the battlefield of Vigrid. Odin gripped Gungnir tightly, his spear carved with runes older than the world itself. Each rune glimmered faintly, a promise of power, a plea to the cosmos. He had known this day would come, the prophecy that no god could escape, yet he did not hesitate. The All-Father, who had sacrificed so much for wisdom, now sacrificed hope itself, facing destiny with unwavering resolve. Fenrir lunged with terrifying speed, and Odin met him with a spear thrust that split the wind. Sparks flew where steel and claw collided. The impact shook the battlefield, scattering gods, warriors, and monsters alike. The wolf twisted, snapping jaws at Odin, each bite a tempest of fury and death. Sleipnir leapt, twisting midair, and Odin struck again, runes blazing, trying to pierce the beast that no binding nor prophecy had fully tamed. The battle raged with cosmic intensity. Every strike from Gungnir echoed across the 9 realms. Every swipe of Fenrir's claw tore the earth, cracking mountains and shattering the very roots of Yggdrasil. Odin fought not just for himself, not just for Asgard, but for all that had ever been. Yet destiny was relentless, and the wolf, driven by the threads of fate, pressed onward with unyielding ferocity. Finally, the moment arrived. Fenrir's jaws closed around Odin. The All-Father fought with the entirety of his divine strength, Gungnir stabbing, piercing, seeking to turn prophecy aside. But the wolf's power, the inevitability of fate, could not be denied. With a final, earth-shaking bite, Odin fell, swallowed by the beast he had long sought to bind. Sleipnir reared and screamed. But the All-Father's form vanished into shadow and legend, leaving the battlefield trembling under the roar of Fenrir. Though Odin was gone, his sacrifice had delayed the collapse of order. The gods, the Einherjar, and the forces of fate themselves paused, taking note of the courage of the All-Father. Even in death, his defiance burned brighter than the fires of Muspelheim. Ragnarök surged forward, yet the story of Odin's stand would echo through the 9 realms for eternity. The sky roared with fury as Thor, god of thunder, stood before the writhing mass of the Midgard Serpent. Its colossal coils churned the oceans into boiling waves, venom sizzling against the frozen remnants of Fimbulwinter. Lightning danced along Mjolnir as Thor gritted his teeth, muscles taut like drawn steel, every heartbeat a drum of war. With a deafening war cry, Thor leapt, hammer raised high. The moment the weapon struck, the heavens themselves seemed to fracture. Mjolnir collided with Jörmungandr's impenetrable scales, sending sparks and venom into the raging storm. The serpent shrieked, a sound that echoed across the 9 realms, a scream of hatred and fury accumulated over centuries. Each strike Thor delivered shattered mountains, and the sea hissed and boiled, unable to contain the wrath of god and monster alike. Coils twisted, waves surged, and Thor pressed forward, relentless, hammer swinging in deadly arcs. Every swing, every blow, pushed the serpent closer to the fate foreseen in prophecy. With a final, titanic strike, Mjolnir smote the serpent's head with such force that the world seemed to pause. Jörmungandr let out a scream of agony that split the air, venom spraying like storms of fire, and at last, the monstrous serpent fell, its massive body crashing into the boiling sea. But triumph came at a terrible cost. Thor, poisoned by the serpent's venom, staggered, feeling life draining with each breath. He looked upon the fallen foe with a mixture of sorrow and satisfaction, knowing that victory was Pyrrhic. His legs weakened, vision blurred, yet the god of thunder did not fall quietly. He had fulfilled his destiny, striking the fatal blow that would shape the final fate of Midgard, even as the poison from Jörmungandr's venom began to claim him. Lightning crackled once more, and Thor's roar echoed through the storm, a declaration to all realms. Even in the shadow of Ragnarök, courage and sacrifice could shake the very foundations of fate. But as he staggered, the inevitable became clear. The end had come for the Thunderer, even in victory. From the fiery heart of Muspelheim, Surtr advanced, his colossal sword blazing brighter than 1,000 suns. The very sky seemed to tremble as he led the legions of fire giants across the Vigrid plain. Mountains cracked beneath their march, rivers boiled, and the ground itself smoked with heat so intense that even the frost of Fimbulwinter hissed in retreat. The giants roared in unison, voices like molten rock breaking apart. Their armor glowed with fire, their eyes alight with hatred and triumph. Each step left craters where molten lava bubbled, swallowing the earth and trees in flames. The air itself became a furnace, scorching lungs, melting shields, and igniting even the strongest armor. The gods and Einherjar fought valiantly to slow their advance. Spears clashed against molten clubs, arrows sputtered in heat waves, and Mjolnir swung in desperate arcs to strike the advancing inferno. Yet no matter how many fell, the tide of fire could not be halted. Surtr moved like an unstoppable sun, each strike cleaving mountains, each swing sending rivers of flame across the battlefield. Even the heavens seemed to burn. Lightning met fire in a tempest of cosmic fury, clouds blackened with smoke and ash, and Valkyries soared through the inferno, their wings slicing flames, guiding the fallen to Valhalla amidst chaos. Every living creature on Vigrid struggled to survive, even as destiny demanded the destruction of all. As Surtr's sword rose to strike, the horizon glowed crimson. Flames licked the sky, mountains became embers, and the world trembled under the sheer heat of the apocalypse. The fire giants were a force beyond reckoning, not merely opponents to fight, but agents of a cosmos-consuming prophecy. Ragnarök was not approaching, it was here, in all its blinding, roaring, unstoppable fire. The battlefield of Vigrid lay in ruins. Smoke and ash choked the air, twisting into dark tendrils that blotted out the dim light of the dying sun. Mountains were shattered, rivers boiled into steam, forests reduced to blackened skeletons. The echoes of thunder, of clashes between gods and monsters, still vibrated across the 9 realms. Silence, heavy and profound, settled for the first time amid the chaos. From the carnage rose the faint, trembling whispers of what remained. The wolf Fenrir prowled over Odin's lifeless form, his roar now tinged with triumph, yet even he faltered, sensing that the world itself had begun to shift beneath the weight of its destruction. Thor, poisoned by Jörmungandr, struggled to his knees, lightning flickering faintly around him before his strength gave way to the venom's fatal embrace. Surtr's legions, victorious, burned what they could, but some sparks of resistance persisted, carried in the hearts of the few gods and warriors who had survived. Yet within the devastation, something miraculous began to stir. Among the blackened ash and crumbled earth, faint glimmers of green emerged, life, delicate but determined, reaching through the ruins. Yggdrasil shuddered, its roots deep and eternal, signaling that even as the old order fell, the seeds of renewal were taking hold. Mimi's wisdom, Odin's foresight, and the sacrifices of gods and warriors alike had not been in vain. Though Ragnarök had unleashed death, fire, and chaos upon all, the prophecy also hinted at rebirth. From the ashes, a new world would rise, stronger, wiser, and perhaps untouched by the failings of the past. The 9 realms, though scarred and bleeding, carried within them the potential for a dawn beyond destruction, a dawn yet unseen, waiting to be forged by those who would survive. And so, as the smoke settled and the winds carried the whispers of both loss and hope, one truth became undeniable: the end of the world was only a prelude. From the twilight of Gard, a new sun would one day rise, bearing the promise that even in death, life, and legend endure.